Well, we started our P2 forum here and topics are wide open. So we got Chip here if anyone has questions or we can discuss anything of any interest to anybody. So.
Well, 20 P2s went out to the masses in USA yesterday. So those were boards from Cluso and Man at Work. So we got 20 more out there that are going to be utilized.
And if TMOS is here, if Cluso's here, once we get ours at Parallax, we'll get them photographed and put them up on our site as well.
Ken?
Yeah.
Is there a list of spin 2 IO drivers for common stuff? I know that a lot of the drivers exist, but I'm not sure where to look for a kind of a simple summary list.
Okay, so as of last week, and if Jeff is here, he can confirm this, we're distributing them in 2 places. One is with the Propeller tool, and then the other, the official list would be on the Propeller 2 software link on our website, which takes you to, okay, you may have caught me here. We're without going straight to GitHub. I want to see if I can actually get there from our own site properly.
Basic IO drivers for P2.
Okay, here's how I would get there. And I admit this is less than ideal at the moment. Coming in here to parallax.com and then under Propeller 2 software, scrolling down to more software and examples. And so, yeah, that's for starters, not a good label. And then here's a list of drivers.
Is this everything in the object exchange?
Let's check. Let's click on something that should obviously be Object Exchange here. Okay, so it appears, I might need to go through a few more of these to verify, but okay, no. So these are linked to a variety of places. It might be forums, might be Object Exchange, meaning GitHub. So once you're in GitHub, click on Parallax Inc. and then Propeller, Libraries, Community, P2, here it all is.
Okay.
Now, I'll be the first to admit this is less than ideal. And I know the hatred towards losing OBEX, and I fully appreciate that. And we've got to figure something out here. And I was planning on, as soon as Jeff gets the Propeller tool released, because he's going to share it with us on the 23rd, that I wanted to turn his attention back here to get this all sorted out in a way it's useful for us.
You could still get to it by typing Propeller OBEX in Google.
Another question while you're doing that is, has anyone gotten any of the Propeller tools stuff running on Raspberry Pi? You know, there's an ARM base.
Well, we did a bunch of telepresence robots that use the Propeller board with the Raspberry Pi.
Right, but I'm thinking of trying to compile, you know, for example, Flex GUI or Flex Spin is something that ought to be makeable for the ARM processor.
I've not heard of that being done, but the request has come up several times, and I know that a few here have discussed it and maybe read about it on the forums.
So basically, Eric stuff does compile on Raspberry. And I think David Simon even built one. I mean, he built the Linux version, but you should be able to run that on a Raspberry. Propeller tool, I guess, don't.
Well,
Even-
I know there's a Linux version of the Flex GUI stuff, but I didn't know if it was also cross-compiled for ARM, because normally it would
I've
be
never heard of
compiled.
it.
Okay.
Never. Ken, if he was to try to do that, wouldn't you have to build an interface like you did on the microbit?
If you compile the Flex, it comes with the the technical interface, and so all you have to do is build it and run it, and it should work. But you are going to have to pull from source and build it. Would be my
And it
guess.
should work over Wi-Fi, for example, or a USB serial port. Well, maybe I'll give it a try in the next week or two.
Is Roy on here? Roy Eltham?
Was here.
Because I think Roy did something like that when he was doing the telepresence robots.
He put something in the chat saying he stepped away for a few minutes, I think.
And I got another question, Ken. Because you can pick Propeller 1 when you're in the IDE, but I could never get it to run. I had to end up bringing up an old version of the Propeller 1 software, one of the older Propeller 2 versions to get my P1s to run.
You're using the new alpha prop tool, trying to program a P1, original P1 spin code, right?
Right.
Does anybody else have that issue?
I use version 2.3 of the Propeller tool, which is the last generation of the updates, and do P1 and P2 stuff all day long. The only drag is that if I want to have both connected to my computer at the same time, which is why I asked Jeff last week if he would consider adding COM port by tab.
That was my problem, was getting the COM port up. And when I went to an older version of the P1 spin tool, then I had no problem at all.
Again, a lot of people reported issues with version 2.4. I'm using version 2.3, which has been around for about a month or so. And
I went
had
even
any
older
trouble.
than that.
Well, I understand,
Yeah.
but if you want to do P2 stuff and not use Peanut, which I don't care for, then you're going to have to use, I would suggest, you don't have to do anything, but I would suggest using version 2.3. It works fine with the P1 and the P2. Now, there's a manual installation requirement. So since you already have the old one, the 1.32 or whatever it is installed,
Right.
just
Right.
download the 2.3 executable and drop it into the same folder and create a separate shortcut for it, and it'll run fine.
Well, I'm only going to run the P1 until I go all the way through the microcontroller book, because it's all P1.
Yeah, there's no benefit then to having a newer version of Propeller tool.
Yeah, then I'll drop to the 2.4 when I go to just doing P2s. I got to relearn spin. I haven't used it in like 8 years or something like that.
Carol, just
Have a
look
cup of
over that
coffee and in
doc.
10 minutes you'll be there.
Did you watch John's August recording, Carol, when he's talking about Spin 2?
No, but I've got his magazine article.
Someone could paste in the link of that video. That might be helpful.
Well, Kara, I kind of joked in the forums today. I imagine you have all of the issues of nuts and bolts that I ever wrote for. So there's lots of material on programming and spin that you probably have sitting near your desk.
Yeah, I've got all nuts and bolts back for quite a few years along with Servo.
I think I wrote 50 or 60 articles on programming and spin.
Yeah, I remember them.
Carol, in the chat, I put JonnyMac's presentation. I think it would be a good resource for you.
Where is it at?
It's in the chat.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
YouTube link. Maybe just bookmark it.
Okay.
Since we're bouncing around a few topics too, maybe it'd be good to see for the next couple of weeks. We're all planning for projects to do over the holidays, since we're in various states of lockdown, apparently, which was just announced where we live. Hopefully next week, Stephen will be able to show off some of his Hub 75 hardware and drivers. So I'm making that a tentative. And then Michael was working on updating the wireless programming and he had that just about ready for today, but something blew up at last minute. So I'm going to put that as a possibility. And JonnyMac, the project we're working on, is that something that we would be sharing?
Yeah, sure, we can. I mean, you might as well spill the beans since you just, spilled the beans.
I don't have any beans.
Yeah, what Ken is talking about, and I'm going to now rat him out. He and I were talking about something else, and I was telling him about coaching a friend of mine from the IT world who wants to learn the P2. His daughter is also going to be involved because she's a college student and learning to program in Python. In fact, when I was at their home, I escaped California for Thanksgiving and went to their house in Arizona, and it was nice because I got to do a little coaching with Michaela on the on programming in Python, and mentioned to her that the P2, which I had sitting with me, I took work with me while I was there, could program in MicroPython. So she got very excited. And Casey, who, for those of you who know Ryan Clark that used to work at Parallax with us, is Casey. Casey is his brother. Anyway, Casey wants to make automated Christmas lights. So I was talking to Ken about this, and Ken said, well, geez, I'd kind of like to do that too. So we're going to do kind of a simple thing. I've got the guys getting a specific set of smart LEDs and a 2-line LCD and an encoder and a temperature sensor just for fun. And we're just going to do a very simple little automated Christmas light. Oh, by the way, and I ordered clocks too, Ken. So we're going to put a real-time clock on it. Anyway, the point of it is just as a programming exercise and to have a little bit of fun around the holidays with the P2, and it gives me a way to exercise some of the objects that I've written, and then work with Ken and with Casey and anybody else. I mean, I guess I could, throw a parts list up and say, hey, here's what we're going to be using. And, all the parts are available other than the P2 from Amazon. So you can get them tomorrow and pretty inexpensively. And we're going to have a bit of fun, making a little Christmas controller.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in that as a group project.
All right, I will put the parts that I've ordered because I'm trading Ken some of my parts for some of his parts. And so I have that list, and I will put it out on the forums to say, okay, this is what we're going to use, and we'll figure out a way. I guess we'll get Ken, since he's the master of, I almost said Discord, of Zoom. Maybe we schedule an off day meeting so we can talk about that. And, Carol, if you want to join in, it's all going to be spin. I'm not doing it. Everybody knows I'm just a spin guy. So all of this is going to be really simple code and some fun. And in the end, we get some Christmas lights, and you learn how to use an encoder, a rotary encoder, for doing a dial. Like I see Lachlan was laughing at me a minute ago, but he has some really fancy rotary encoders with lights in them. I like those. Some Christmas lights, you'll talk about I2C because we've got an I2C LCD, and the RTC uses I2C, and a one-wire temperature sensor. So it's really about programming in Spin 2, a little about protocols and understanding them, and then putting together a little fanciful project.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I did my Christmas tree with the WS2812 RGBs.
Yeah, these are because they're really inexpensive on Amazon. We got a string of WS2811s that have 8mm LEDs on them, so they look like miniature Christmas lights.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
I will, by the end of the day, I'll put the parts list up on the forums.
You might remember that tree. I put it on, where did I put it? I guess right now it only exists on my YouTube page. It's the Christmas tree's mounted on an Arlo, and the Arlo slowly turns while the RGB lights make streaking colors. So
John, this will be good
seen it.
because a lot of people are asking for projects with parts now, just so they could get a little closer to things and run some code from others and learn from examples. So even something like this, I'd be inclined just to get them in a bag.
Well, one of the things for me personally, because I've been going through and kind of reviewing stuff before I started in with you and Casey, was that, you know, I've been reviewing the objects that I wrote, and I found little, you know, well, for example, Chip will tell you, the other day I got excited because of an instruction in PASM 2 called move bytes, which for, you know, probably all the hardcore people know this, but I didn't until the other day. But in one instruction, you can shuffle around all of the bytes within a word, or sorry, within a long. And so in the P1, the smart pixel code takes about 9 lines of code to flop 2 bytes within the color long. In the P2, it now takes 1. And, you know, and it's faster anyway. So that's just one of those really kind of fun things of discovery, you know, makes the code more efficient. So, you know, the doing practical stuff like we're going to be doing is a good way to review one's code.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Examples and hardware in people's hands really gets them going.
How would you think, though, about putting something in another body? I was thinking of putting a propeller in one of my hexabod robots so that I could get all 8 legs to move simultaneously. Well, actually, most of them have only 6 legs. Make a more compelling gait than the 1 leg at a time you have to do now.
My thoughts on that initially from where I see the objects where they are or aren't is it might be easier in a P1.
Well, what I meant is putting your propeller in somebody else's robot body.
Oh, well, I'd love for us to be transplanted in somebody else's robot body. It seems fitting for 2020.
There's lots of P1 objects, Carolyn. Carol, I wrote one that will, I never needed more than 8 servos at a time, so that's what my servo object does. But it has the ability to do simultaneous moves at a specific speed, so you could probably use that to develop really nice walking algorithms that were moving in a coordinated manner.
Yeah, I have quite a few algorithms of my own for walking. I do a lot of walking robots. You guys just don't see them as much because it's not a parallel product.
I'm pretty sure your code, John, is the library behind our Blockly system as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think it is. So I think you wrote in Spin, we converted it to C and then dropped it in a Blockly prop. Carol uses that. I just don't want to lead Carol with her precious time in the direction of where she can't achieve her goal because we don't have objects yet.
Well, but she was talking about the P1, I think, Ken.
Oh, okay.
And my code certainly is available in the P1.
That's
the interesting thing about the P2 is that each pin can be a servo controller. So now if you want to do coordinated things, you would actually write a management cog, which you could easily do in Spin, that manages the motion of any number of servos. You no longer have to do anything about generating the pulses because the smart pins in the P2 will do that for you.
There is also a Servo 32 object written by, forgot that name, Duran Deng, whatever forum name. He wrote this 32 servo object in 1 cog, I think it is, in Spin 1, as for Spin 1. We have to look and search the forum.
Yeah, there's a couple of them out there. I'm a very practical person. I always thought if you need 32 servos, then you probably should be looking to do something else.
No, I don't use that many. I believe in the KISS principle, and my walking robots generally only have 6 to 12 servos in them, depending on what they're doing.
Yeah. And if you look at that code, because interestingly, Carol, my servo code, which does ramping and all of that other stuff, it's in Spin. There's no assembly in it. And so the way that it works is it takes the 20 millisecond refresh window and it breaks it into 8 slots and it updates 1 servo per slot. And while the pulse is going, which is generated by the counters, it's doing the math for its next cycle. So it makes it really easy. But remember, each cog has 2 counters. So you could actually, if you wanted, you could very easily adapt that and make it a 16 servo driver without using any more cogs.
The 32 servo driver was Bo.
Oh yeah, Bo did have a very large servo driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what he does, he does a little interesting thing. He updates 8 servos at a time every 5 milliseconds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, just to ping on something John said, regarding 2 counters per cog, that's on P1, not P2. On P2,
Yeah, sorry, that's on the P1. Yes, I
on
was
P2 it's all in the pin. You don't need other cogs. You can do it all from one cog and just talk to however many pins you have servos connected to drive them.
Yep.
Programming a walking robot in Blockly Prop is a piece of cake. You can come up with many different walks.
I'm setting up my hexapod. It's got 6 P1s, one for each leg, but I tried to use a P1 for the master computer, but I found it was running the algorithms, the inverse kinematics was just way too slow. So the P2, I think, is going to solve my problem for that. I just got, like I said, I got one more object to figure out, and then I'll be ready to start programming that thing again. So I just got to get the multi-port communications.
Yeah, I tried to do it.
John's been helping me on that a little bit, but ran into a roadblock here. So.
Well, I do want to solve that because I have a client that does laser tag, and we're going to upgrade their hardware from P1 to P2, and we don't need, I guess, because the P2 we lose the necessity to have as many cogs because there's PWM in the P1 version that the pins can do now. There's a couple of other things that the smart pins, remove the cogs, but the serial that we're doing is such low bandwidth, it just would make sense to have one cog doing that. And I set up my full duplex serial in P2 so that I don't have my camera turned on today, but I'm doing air quotes. It should be easy, but what I want to do is I have a new computer, and what I don't have is the old multi-port P1 serial. I'm looking for that. Because I want to see, I think Tracy Allen, was he not involved in that? Or,
Tracy created it. In fact, if you look in that, on the forum, I think 1 or 2 posts ago on the thread that I've got, I did post his old code as a comparison.
Okay, I'll look, because I just want to try to stay a little bit in alignment with what others were doing before. But I'm pretty sure that what my strategy was or is going to be is that the driver will support one port by default, and then if you want to add other ports, you have to point to an external structure that says, hey, here's where my buffers are and all the other stuff. So those would be outside of the object. That way the main object doesn't have to store enough for all the possible ports it might use.
Cool.
That was where I was running into my problem, was trying to figure out how to keep it relatively simple, and ran into a brain block. So
since Spin doesn't have the ability to do like malloc or those kind of fancy memory tricks that C and other languages do, I guess I started doing this even in the P1 with my pixel drivers, for example, which I use all the time. Instead of having a buffer inside the driver for the pixels, my newer pixel drivers, even in the P1, you tell it which pin you're using, which type, because all of the one wire pins, you can use the same code, you just have to adjust timing, and then you tell it where in the hub your color buffer is. So the color storage is no longer in the driver, it's in your main application. That way it can grow or shrink with your application. You don't have to, especially with the P1, it's important, even with 32K, you don't want to be throwing away memory on buffer space that's not used.
Michael, Roy is back now. Maybe you can ask him that question again about the Raspberry Pi and the...
Sure. Thank you. I will. Roy?
Yep.
I put this in the chat window, but basically, the question is, who has already converted something like Flex GUI or another P2 IDE? Who's cross-compiled it and gotten it running on a Raspberry Pi, if anyone?
I don't think it was cross-compiled. I think you just need to get it get the source from GitHub on your Raspberry Pi and build it on the Pi.
All right. I'll give it a try.
Eric develops it all on Linux. So all the make file for it and all that stuff are all ready to go for Linux. You may run into some issues when it tries to do the TCL stuff where you need to update your TCL TK installs for it to build those. But that's so that you can get the actual FlexGUI IDE to run. But other than that, it should build. In fact, I think David Zeman's Team City site is already building some of that stuff for all the platforms, including Raspberry Pi. You might want to go look at the Team City David Zeman thing.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Roy.
Yep.
Just had a thought. You know, the problem, what you don't want in a real-time system is garbage cleanup, right? Because it stalls things in unpredictable ways. But I'm thinking if we had a cog that did that, and it could receive requests for memory, and it would maintain some kind of memory allocation table, and it could, you know, pass you know, blocks of requested sizes and then go and do the cleanup. Do you think that could like sufficiently get around the problem? Because I've always avoided the whole cleanup thing because of what it does to real time.
Yeah, the garbage collection is kind of a big debated issue in programming. Some languages have it built in to the language, and some people build in garbage collection to their C++ code bases, like Unreal Engine that we're using has a subset of the things that you use with it are garbage collected. Not everything is garbage collected because it's still C++, but when you make actor entities, they're all garbage collected. So if no one references any of them, they all go away. So the main issue you'll run into with garbage collection is that you need to keep track of all the references to that memory, which is going to be difficult if people can pass pointers around into that memory and you don't keep track of all those pointers. Then you can't safely clean up the memory because you don't know if something's still using it.
Right. Once allocated, nothing moves though, right?
Well, yeah. So the one way to get around it is to not return to them a pointer, but instead return to them a handle that they have to use to ask for the memory temporarily, to say, hey, I want this memory that this handle goes to, and then they use it and then relinquish the memory with the handle, you know, in their lifetime. That's one way, but most of the languages that have it built in just hide all that behind the covers, right? And every pointer has extra information about the memory so that the GC, the garbage collection routine, when it runs, can go see if any of those pointers are still in use or not null. If they are all null, then it will clean up the memory.
Right. For anyone that doesn't know the background of this, right now the way Spin2 works is at compile time, you declare all of your variable space, and that's allocated by the compiler, and it never moves. But this, in an operating system, you can't really do that because you need to have, you don't know what applications are going to be running. So you have to have some dynamic way to allocate memory.
Yeah, well, I mean, as it is right now, someone could write a memory manager for Spin, just consuming whatever's left over. Like they could just make a giant heap variable and manage the memory from that themselves with just regular Spin code that like you don't have to change anything. It's just that it's extra work that they'd have to write that. Like you could provide that as a object or option, right? That there's a memory, you know, if you give me a heap with this memory allocation object, then it can give you memory back and forth. But I don't know if I would go about building it into the language unless you're going to restructure the whole language to keep track of all the pointers.
Yeah, no, it's a huge thing. It's like when we got this software that Parallax runs on called SysPro. We thought, oh, great, we'll just start using it. We didn't realize that instead of just employing the software, it's like this scaffolding that you have to reorganize the business onto in order to be able to use the software. And it was a huge thing. And that's kind of like bringing memory management into the picture. And
there's also another factor. If you want to do garbage collection, you're you're gonna nuke determinism because
yeah, and that's why
you
we
have
don't.
to call
Yeah.
GC every once in a while, and it's going to take an undetermined amount of time to do its work.
Well,
So you'd want it to just be a regular heap like malloc and free, and just have the user manage it. But you know, we could just make an object that is a memory manager for the free space in the memory, and that object could even be extended for HyperRAM once it's there.
There's a way of doing that, and I'm working on it if you want to see it.
Doing
All
what?
right.
Which
Okay.
thing?
Okay, believe it or not. So I'm going to go to screen sharing and I'll show you exactly how that will work because that is a work in progress. Okay, it's not running on Propeller yet, but it's working in Windows and I'll try to write code as portable as possible. So are you ready? Okay, so I'm going to go to screen sharing.
I just want to congratulate you on your new audio system.
Yeah, I bought this orange box microphone at at Walmart, and it seems to work good. It's a cheap $9 headset, and it works better than all my DJ stuff. Okay, so let me go to screen sharing, and here we go. And now we're in Visual Studio, and what I want to show you here, first of all, is this is the COM object that I'm working on, but I'll show you something that's really wild, right? Like since the last couple of weeks, I've got overlapped working. So here we have this overlapped pointer here, if you can see this, and we have this current overlap transmit buffer and then the next buffer, and it's cycling through buffers every time I press a character. So we'll go to this and I'll type in, you know, let's really be brave here. Let's close the serial connection, close the box. Okay, open a new window, click OK, and open serial connection and pray that nothing goes wrong. There we go. Now we're in tacos. Okay, so I'm going to type dir, and there's the directory. And I'm deliberately running at 19,200 today because I'm doing some testing of other devices like an LCD display and some other stuff that doesn't go at 3 megabits. So that's why we're a little slow here. But all the words are there, no dropped characters. And you cannot possibly tell that if I go into prop serial right here, pound define, max buffers 192. And the transmit buffer size is 80 bytes. The receive buffer size is 80 bytes. All of that you see here, all of this was being fed through a sequence of 80 byte buffers, which you can see, for example, in transmit. Let me go into the COM object again. The transmit object is actually doing, if we're in overlapped mode, then we write to the file, we pass this overlapped object called get last error. And
hey,
then,
Gerald, can you
yes.
define what you mean by overlapped?
Okay, overlapped is like, you know, like imagine, you know, you're running a pizza delivery place and one person is making pizzas and putting them in the oven and somebody else is delivering, just like threads. So you don't have to wait for the pizza that's in the oven to be delivered before you can put another pizza in the oven. You can call this function, I can call this function write file, and I don't have to wait 10 milliseconds for it to return if I'm only at like 1200 baud. It returns instantly, and then what will happen is Windows will generate an interrupt and signal the thread that says, okay, I'm done, what next? And that allows you to write at full speed because you want gapless transmission, just like audio. When you have audio, and let's say I have a 100 millisecond chunk, I can't wait for that 100 millisecond chunk to finish playing before I feed the second chunk to the sound driver, or there will be a gap between when the interrupt fires that says, the wave is done playing, what now? Oh, a whole millisecond could go by. That's a disaster. You have to be able to queue up multiple read requests or multiple write requests and have them fire off one after the other, which is what they call it overlapped. It's actually chained, you know, sort of a misnomer, like saying bats have radar, they have sonar. they navigate by sound. But
yeah, so you're managing all these, you've got 192 80-byte transmit buffers and 80-byte receive buffers.
the same as the Apple II high-res page. Okay, because I'm playing with some ideas of like writing streaming video between like a Propeller and have it generate Apple II video, and instead of sending it to VGA, why not send it to Windows and have it grab that and have the data, have the memory already magically arranged in the correct places, right? So the 6502 emulator can poke data into a contiguous buffer where it thinks it's supposed to write to and stuff like that, which means this would be really weird if this piece of code could also do streaming MIDI, streaming Apple II, why not streaming VGA, why not SD card, flash, right? And as somebody said, there's really no need for malloc. When you compile, you know how many buffers you want. And then like in my COM object, just to prove that this is actually working, I'm going to go to on idle, and I'm going to, let me see, that's the COM, it's not the COM object, that's the COM thread. I want the COM thread. So I'm going to go to the idle loop. This is actually being done in a thread. And I go to this idle loop, and right here, if I set a breakpoint, it's going to pause. So I'm going to remove that breakpoint. I'm going to step into the code. This is the polling function, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to set another breakpoint, and I'm going to resume, which is where I'm hitting F5. Now the program is running. So here's something interesting is going to happen. I'm going to type W for words. There's my breakpoint. Okay, and now I'm back in Visual Studio. It's fired this event. Okay, that's where Windows is signaling an event to my thread, which means read buffer does not get called until there are bytes in the buffer, right? So now I'll hit F5 again, and there we go. Now I can come back here, and now I finally get to see my W. So I'll do an O, and now I'm back here, F5, back here, R, right, and so on. And if you imagine that firing 190 times or whatever, did I hit F5? I'm going to get running again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Serial ports can be brutal to debug because you're asking it to like pause the thread words. Wish me luck. Oh, we didn't get it that time because I confused it with all those breakpoints. But there we go. Now we're getting it. Okay, and that's those 192 buffers being cycled through, right? Haha. So that's why I'm trying to run things super slow so that I can see what's happening and set breakpoints and saying, okay, which buffer am I writing to? Which buffer am I reading from? How can I make the buffer smaller while making the speed go faster so that I can have like 4 COM objects or 8 COM objects, or have like a MIDI device and a SPDIF device and audio read-write and video, all using the same buffer pool and the same pool manager, and then whatever else somebody is doing as far as, for all intents and purposes, implementing this, right? We go back to the COM object, and they're going to be implementing whatever it is. We go to something like read buffer, and that's reset buffer, but read buffer. When we go into actually reading the buffer, then we have the we get the buffer and we read from it, and we're all happy. But it makes me wonder if writing to a buffer could be just like scheduling a streamer to output some VGA. Why not, right? Isn't that what it is? The VGA is a serial device. The mouse is a serial device. Everything's, the flash memory, the SD cards, that's all serial devices. Why not have, why not see how far I can push a serial port driver into using the capabilities of the streamers, saying, you know, okay, I have some sprites I want to blit in, you know, classic Atari 2600 mode. Go blit sprites for me. Why not? You know, that's the direction I'm going. And, you know, it's coming along, but, you know, I've got all these other back burner things that I'm thinking of, 6502 emulation and, you know, getting the whole debug GUI going. But definitely, there's definitely the way to go, I think, in doing this stuff in terms of, you know, malloc and stuff. What I do is I allocate that using, I use a function which is, that's in the com thread. And that is somewhere up here. That's allocate buffers. That's where I call virtual alloc, and I set these features like I lock the buffer and I use this no cache option here, which is here, where I say no cache because I don't want Microsoft's virtual memory swapping my pages out while I'm trying to read and losing 100 milliseconds while it reloads, even though it's a 48 gigabyte machine. You never know what Windows is.
Oh yeah, that's the problem.
So you're pre-allocating all these buffers. So you basically just have a pool of buffers that you're managing, and everything asks for a buffer through your buffer manager.
Correct.
We have a similar templated version of this in our game engine code. It's a pooled object allocator, and you just tell it the object type, which is a structure or a class, and it will create X number of them ahead of time and then allow you to ask for them and relinquish them back, and it won't do memory allocations after the first time. It'll just give you one of the ones it has.
Yeah, and the streamers could use those to blit sprites, and maybe the same code could be used by a tile manager to say,
I mean, the streamer is just going to stream data from absolute source to an absolute destination. So you would have to write something to fill the source location that the streamer is then going to spew out to wherever it's set up to go to.
That's what an application does. That's what an application does.
Yeah, no, I understand.
But at the same time, as far as the COM object is concerned, I'm going to try this on the Propeller at some point, try to get this code where instead of calling write file, I put in a call either to spin or some inline PASM that says this logic, right? There's a certain amount of logic in getting a pointer, increment the, you know, get the next buffer in the chain, schedule the next buffer so that when I get a read call back, and as far as dealing with going to like the header file for the COM object, there's all of these variables, right? The buffer position, the number of bytes read, the number of bytes written. This is the sort of stuff that would get put onto into a cog object, and it's going to say, okay, I have these sprites to blit, and I have this magic function that if the smart pin is configured not as a serial object, it should be able to, you know, it's a question of whether you can switch between sprites on the fly, you know, which is a little different. But that is in effect overlapped IO. In effect, it's just saying, here, blit from this object, now blit that object. You know, I got 192 of them, you know, do some of this and then some of that and go back and do some of these. So, you know, whatever.
Sounds like you have several engineering careers here in this project.
The other factor is that this is all in C, and Chip was looking for something to implement into Spin, I think.
Well, I'm going to try compiling it in Flex GUI as soon as I have a little more done, and run some of my serial class on the P2 side, and then get the two sides to talk to each other in addition to doing the debugging functions. But I'm also still working on the message crackers where, okay, great, I have 192 buffers, or I have 512 buffers as far as I want. Now I have to be able to send individual buffers to individual windows as far as like the oscilloscopes and things like, well, this buffer goes to oscilloscope 4 and this one goes to, you know, XY plotter number 3, and this is just a text object. And so by having smaller buffers, it becomes possible to, you know, dice and slice, rearrange, shuffle, and then process the data that is being processed when I extract the keywords. So I'm following along, starting to look again at the actual Delphi code in terms of implementing the message crackers, so that I can then take data that's coming from the P2 and implement the GUI and not just be drawing Smith charts or text. Because obviously I have a terminal mode. I just have to get the GUI side running, and then it's done. It just takes a long time. This is like, I think I've written about 4,000 lines of code, myself, in terms of what is going on to make this all work.
Well,
so
maybe make something totally simple so the mortals can play with it, an executable that we could run and do a scope display or something.
Yeah. Okay. So you want something totally simple, like at least get the oscilloscope running or something, at least get one view running.
Let's say like a bunch of analog inputs. Yeah. Something the P2 does, so we can demonstrate that.
Yeah. So like I've got the Smith charts and things, and what I need to do is figure out how the message crackers work in the original Delphi code, and actually sends the draw commands, because I've got the document view support. I can have 100 windows open if I want. I just have to get into that Delphi code and translate all of the Delphi calls, which are, the conversion of the Delphi to C is done. It's matching up Borland APIs against Windows APIs. So I'm very close, very, very close.
Oh my gosh.
And it's gonna be nice. It's gonna be worth waiting for. Okay.
Gerald, can us mortals with only 32 gigs be able to do it?
I'm trying to make this thing run like on a like on a Raspberry Pi, or like I said, I want to actually get the COM object to run on the Propeller side, so that like one P2 can host another P2. That would be fun. Right, to actually have the debug terminal on one P2 chip, and then have the other P2 chip where all 8 cogs are available for anybody to just have whatever sandbox they want, right, for multi-prop systems. So, and it'll just be just like the debug system that Chip wrote. You just say, you tell that system, give me a window, it pops open a window, and you don't have to learn about Microsoft Foundation class programming. You say, I want a text window. You got a window, you can move it around with a mouse. You want an oscilloscope, you can have an oscilloscope. You can't have really, really, really complicated Windows like things that have thousands of buttons and fancy alpha blending and stuff, because we don't have the RAM for it. But we're very close. I think we're like at 300 megahertz Pentium class performance or better on the P2 itself. When you think about clock speeds, the fact it's 32-bit, and what the streamers are capable of, plus we've got 8 of them. There's a lot of power. It's just learning how to use it. So
well, thanks for the update. So it's 3 o'clock. This means it's time for a commercial break. All right, so the commercial break starts off with an apology for JonnyMac, because while we've been selling his name and flying it around and trying to generate revenue, he has not received a JonnyMac board yet.
And neither have I.
No. Yeah, and there are several others I've made promises to, but today those are all being delivered upon. So sorry, Chip. Sorry, JonnyMac. Sorry, Jim.
You're sending me one today?
Yes.
Oh, great.
And the reason is it was not possible to extract one from the pipeline. Okay, the fire hose goes on, and we had to fill the swimming pool before we could jump in it. Something like that. All right, So here's something.
You didn't send me any, did you?
Yours is coming.
I've already got 2.
I'm going to have to argue with you like Roy. You guys beat me to it every time. Well, thanks for keeping us in business. So at least for JonnyMac then, and Chip, and a few others where those promises have been made, these are coming. They were very slow to build. And we have at the moment, if you go onto our website of this thing, I put a message on the forums yesterday, being a salesman, to which many of you responded, where we had 60 of these. Now we have 28. But when I was in the office today, I saw that we had about 40 more coming, and I think that'll be it for a long time, because these little 1x12 headers we bought all of them all over Earth, and we have to wait now until early January or late December to get a big shipment of them. And although there are many that look like it, we don't want to rev the PC board at this moment. We need to get those that fit the holes that we have. So that's the condensed version of this. And there's something else we added here. We made you a fancy JonnyMac bundle, all right, which represents most of the parts you're buying here. And then we made the mini Mac bundle, or whatever you want to call it. And that's just with the mini breakout board instead. So some people are opting for this just to save a lot of money.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine ask me about how hard would it be to get a board that has the same edge as the P2 edge to plug into this socket, but with like Protoboard area on the upper part so that he can make his own interface into that edge connector. But I don't know why he wants that, because you need a P2 to work with the JonnyMac breadboard or something. But it was just something, he's like a prototyper, so, and he's talking about like make a P2 edge but without the chips and anything on it, and just Protoboard area.
Would that be this?
No. The card that plugs into the socket. So like the actual P2 edge board, right?
Yeah.
The edge connector on the end of it.
Oh, with
that plugs into the socket,
yeah.
But then just the board itself is blank and just has prototype area like that, like just the holes plugged.
I was gonna say there's already, there you go.
Right, but that's for P1. We're talking about for P2.
But something like this. That's an interesting idea, Roy.
Couldn't you just take the P1? No, they'd be different pinouts.
Ken, I was thinking too that at some point you might want to make a P1 edge, and then a blank board as Roy is talking about, because then you get more mileage out of the P2 edge breadboard system.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
In fact, when I was working at the cybersecurity company, one of the bosses came to me one day and he dropped a PDB on my desk and he said, "Do you have any idea what this is?" Do you have any idea what I do? And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I helped create that." And he
That's
said,
John's board.
Create one for us. And Ryan Clark and I started down that path. Interestingly, we were going to put a socket on it, a SIM type socket, so that we could plug in any processor and we would put the processors on the board. So that's what I think, again, I think what Roy is talking about. I'd like to see a P1 edge and then a blank edge card, so that if you wanted to put an ESP32, for example, or maybe since you guys already use the ESP32 inside, an ESP32 edge, so that people can use the edge breadboard for a bunch of projects.
Quick objects for that idea.
I definitely agree that it would be really nice to have a P1 edge card that plugged into the P2 edge socket.
Yeah.
And you could just like ignore, like all the IOs above 32 can just be ignored. And,
yeah, no connects.
And all the power connections, it would just use the one set of 3.3 volt input to power the prop, right? That's all it needs. And additionally, like I was saying, you guys are already planning on making, I think you guys are already planning on making a hyper RAM version of the P2 Edge. It would also be cool to have a P2 Edge where the card was a little bigger, still had all the same stuff on it, but had prototype area on it, right on the card that plugged into the socket.
So the idea there is to have a low-cost through-hole perf board that you could use for project area, right? And then not have the cost of the P2 in the same board, right?
No.
Is that it?
There's like multiple ideas that sort of sprung up out of all this. One is just a blank one, right? So it's just the edge that plugs into the socket. And then like JonnyMac was saying, we could plug in whatever circuitry on there we want. P1, ESP, whatever. some other processor that doesn't exist, and have it use the breadboard and pinouts of the Johnny McFarlane board, or John McFarlane board, right, that you guys make for other microcontrollers, including the P1. But then the other idea that I think is what my friend wants, but I'm not sure, is a P2 edge just like it is now, but just extended taller with prototype area above it or below it that you could add your own circuitry to. It would still plug into the edge connector and work with the breadboard or the mini thing, but you could put your own stuff right on the prototype right on the edge card.
That's sort of
Not
like
sure.
a project board almost.
Yeah, I'm not sure that last one is very useful. I think the two ones that are the most interesting is the P1 version, so that you can plug a P1 card into because you guys aren't going to be making PPDBs anymore. So this P2 breadboard thing is kind of the equivalent of a PPDB. And so if there was a P1 edge, right, or just an edge board that you could plug a flip in, right, or something like that, something simple and cheap, so you don't have to spend a lot of design time on it or anything. That would be kind of cool. And then a blank one that just allowed you to plug whatever you want in.
Yeah, that was my thought too. When JonnyMac was talking about a P1 edge, I was thinking the flip, like could just use the flip somehow.
Probably just make a card that had a flip socket, right? 2 rows of 20 pins, and mapped it to the IOs on the edge card, but the flip would be powered. So one of the things I don't know on the edge card is one of the pins going up into the card, the 5-volt power coming from the barrel jack?
Yeah, that supplies the 3.3 volt regulator, and that supplies the 1.8 volt regulator on, right?
Right. So that 5 volts that goes up in could go to the pin on the flip to power it, right? And then it would just have all of its IOs go down to the first 32 IOs on the edge. So the card would be super basic. Like it would just be the edge card with a socket for the flip and maybe a couple of passives.
Yeah, as long as there's no conflict, I guess, between the USB or whatever the 5 volts is coming out of the flip and the 5 volts from the barrel jack on the edge breadboard. But what that does, Ken, from a practical standpoint, it lets you build up something with one processor and translate it to another. And, we've all got P1 stuff that's working, and you can say, okay, this all works. Now let me plug a P2 into it, pull out the P1 edge and put in the P2 edge, and now start to translate the code. It's kind of a nice thing to do very quickly instead of having to build up 2 sets of the same project.
And it's a permanent application too.
And I'm pretty sure the flip already handles if you're powering it from USB or the VN on the flip. It deals with if they're both on already.
Okay, yeah. So as Roy points out, it becomes very, very easy.
Yeah.
It's a socket. It's a 40-pin socket on an edge PCB.
Why not just a good old breadboard?
Well,
that's what I do all my flip work with.
There's a lot of convenience to the P2 edge breadboard, especially if you want to start to work with the accessories that Michael and Chip developed, or the click boards or all those. That system, is kind of nice. I mean, we all have 100 breadboards sitting on our desk, but sometimes a little convenient connection is nice too. And
the clipboards I have will only fit in the little adapters that go on the evaluation board and not on...
Those adapters will plug into the P2 breadboard, John McFarlane board. It has the same connections around the edge of it.
As does the mini breakout board.
Right, and if we had a P1 version of the edge card, then it makes it really nice for transitioning from P1 to P2, because you can plug in your P1 edge, hook up all the peripherals, and verify your software works with all the peripherals on the P1. Then you just pull out the P1 edge card, plug in the P2 edge, and edit your software until it works.
Yeah,
because you know all the hardware is right.
Oh, here, yeah, they're all in pairs for the click adapter. Okay, I bought a whole bunch of them so I could try them out. Oh, you have to use a prop plug on this, don't you? I haven't used this board yet.
Yeah, and I know you're looking for P2 stuff, Ken, and we're pitching P1 stuff, but
well, it's interesting.
It's a general positive for the P1 to P2 transition.
Well, it might be another way to move the clicks as well for us.
Exactly. Right. And there's a lot of the conversation in the forums too about transitioning from P1 to P2. So this facilitates that from a hardware standpoint. And that's how, Bob Sweeney and I kind of became friends over the holiday because he had some P1 code. And I had some time on my hands, and so we sorted it out. I wrote the code, he tested it. Now there's a working P2 object for the community. So I think it would be good for Parallax, Ken. Yes, it's another piece of hardware, but going with you and Roy suggest if you just put a flip socket, that's kind of an evening project for somebody as gifted as Michael is with PCB layout, especially since there are no critical things. It's a 2-layer board. It's not. Well,
if we could use a
6-layer board,
if we could make a socketed version, it's really just a friendly adapter. That would probably be the way to go, because we end up losing like flips to P1 edges if we make a P1 edge.
Right.
And then people start to get nervous about whether or not the flip's going to be around. And
well,
that approach is okay, though. You're saying
adapter. I think it's a really good idea.
That's evening project.
It's also something that would also be something that in theory should be fairly cheap, because it's literally just a PCB with a socket and maybe a resistor or capacitor or something if necessary. And so you should be able to, then people can buy a flip and one of those to go with their breadboard, and then they can use clicks or P2 accessories even with the P1, some of which will work just fine on the P1.
Well, also people are complaining. I dealt with a tech call the other day. Poor engineer, he might even be here. He's looking at the P2 just for the VGA connector in the accessory kit. So there's a VGA connector in the accessory kit, right?
Yeah, there's a board that has VGA plus the
HDMI
component. It's got component / audio and VGA all in one.
So we just continued that silly little part. And it was originally on the P1 demo board, and then it was on the BOE, and then we had a little adapter, and they just kind of fell out of our store, and he was looking for days for one, and he couldn't find one. So this would solve other needs where we have eliminated hardware that people wanted. I just will never discontinue anything again after talking to this customer. Really, the nicest guy. He must have been from the South, but he'd been down every path and every forum thread looking for things.
And then to me, I have a lot of your legacy stuff.
I should have called you for a VGA adapter for him, but I couldn't find one because they probably went out in our mystery boxes or something. But
I was going to say I have a few of them because I think I had some from before, and I think one of the mystery boxes I got had 1 or 2 of them in it.
So I made a note about the adapter for flip, and we'll put that on our list. I think
what we really need to do to sell this stuff is for all of us to dedicate ourselves to making some kind of a tutorial or a lesson that can go on the Learn site so people see what they can do with it.
Exactly. And my goal personally is to move in that direction and to start doing things now and using some hardware and building some circuits and achieving something. And a lot of people want to go that way. And I also would want to organize our objects properly. Since we blew up OBEX with that cloud behind you, Carol, it's never quite been the same, and we all know it. And you have to be skilled to find and access and put to use a lot of the material we have now. So that's our biggest weakness, that and getting Chip to produce more objects for us.
Well, there's a lot of broken link in the new software. So like if you go to look for P1 stuff, you get a screen that says this is no longer working and things like that.
Send those over when you see them, because we're fixing them one by one.
Oh yeah, just go into your the version 2.4 of the spin tool and click on P1, and you just get a thing that says screen is not working, or this page is not working.
And when you say click on P1, so which version of the prop tool? I'm just going to open up and check that out.
The newest version. That's why I thought it was kind of funny you have the P1 on there, but then no links to it.
Is the prop
tool broken links?
The prop tool configured for P2 or P1 usage?
I thought it could do P1 also, but doesn't seem to be able to.
Well, I think it changes a little bit on what documentation comes up depending on whether or not you're in P1 or P2 configuration.
Well, that's just it. When you pick up the P1 thing, you get pages not working.
Yeah, I don't think it does, Francis. I was just looking at 2.3, and when you go into the help file, it lists P2 and P1 code. Help, one kind of large help section. But if anything, as Carol points out, if anything was pointing at the old website from inside the IDE, that might be a broken link now.
No, the old website's still listed up at the top. I'm talking about when you pull down, oh, I can't remember which menu it is that lets you pick what board you're going to work with. And with the Propeller 1, it just goes to a thing that says page not working.
Are you talking about Propeller tool, Carol?
Yeah, the newest version, the 2.4.
That must be new 2.4. Like I said, I'm running 2.3 because people reported problems with 2.4 because the selection for 2.3 is you have to save the file to, and then it goes from the file extension from that point.
I'm using 1.3.2 for my P1s.
Oh. Well, I have that one too.
Because that's smooth as silk with the P1s.
Yeah, I just tried 2.4. If any of the P1 selections under help doesn't seem to do anything. The P2s work, but not the P1.
That's what I needed.
Oh, and Ken, I just found one too. Since I have, but if you look on the help page underneath the separation where it says view character chart, there's a bunch of it says visit object exchange, visit PE kit, visit propeller chip discussions. Those links are probably what Carol was having troubles with. I'm going to look in 2.3 and see if.
No, it was the link that, who was it just mentioned? Under help on P1, you can't get to anything.
Well, it's all the P1 links at the top of that help screen. The reference, the quick starts, all that stuff don't seem to do anything on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything on mine either. I filed an issue on GitHub.
Okay, we took it straight to the source.
Yeah, and it's probably the install if it's 2.4 because with 2.3 there was no installer. You had to do a 1.32 or whatever the older version is installation, which had all those things set up correctly, and then you just put a new exe in there, and it works. I'm not having with version 2.3 that I'm running. I'm not having trouble with any of those links. I can get to them all.
Well, like I said, as soon as I'm done with the microcontroller book, I'm going through it judiciously. I'd never done that before, going through the whole book page by page by page, so I can get every little bit of knowledge out of it I can. And then I'll go to P2.
I must be the exception here. I'm using 2.4 and all those links seem to be working except for the education kit.
The links don't work for me in 2.4. They work in the old 2.0 alpha version. They work there, but not in 2.4.
Well, I'm also going to go through the PE education kit book also because I still have my old kit.
I have the, it's actually 2.4.3 that he come out with a couple, maybe 3 weeks ago. It still says it's version 2.4, but it was 2.43 that I downloaded.
Let me go see what version mine is.
Check the version on mine. It still says 2.4, but I know it was downloaded as 2.43.
Yeah, there's a release 2 and a release 3 version, and the about box does not identify which release you're running.
Yeah, Ken, I just want to jump in here and make sure it didn't slip by the other P2 Edge card that we talked about. You got the one for adapting a flip, but also one that's just blank with prototype area.
Yeah.
So the entire card is just a blank prototype area with the edge on it, and the bottom couple of rows of the prototype area have the 80 pins exposed.
Kind of like a P1 project board with a socket for the edge.
Right, but with no actual circuitry on it.
I think this would be good for your train project.
Yeah, maybe.
Because you can hook up all your crossing gates and detection stuff on there.
I'm actually going to be making, I've decided long term I'm going to make a custom board that will plug a P2 Edge into it. And that will have all the screw terminal edges for plugging all the switching and lighting into.
Nice. Since we're on this topic, and I think Francis pointed out, what are the files, PCB files, that people would like from us to do their own work? So anything we make, we can release dip trace files on.
Well, I think you've already got them, but like just the layout of the holes for the sockets to plug into. So like if I buy one of those right angle sockets or the straight up sockets, I'm pretty sure it's just built into the layout of that socket on the PCB, so you can just plop one down and then connect your traces to it.
You're talking about the various 380 pin connectors.
Right, the footprints of them with the pins on them.
And I believe only one we've actually put in a dip trace because we're using it on the mini breakout board and on the JonnyMac.
Right, you're just using the one that's the straight up and down.
Yeah.
But the right angle one has a slightly different arrangement, which is annoying. You can't plug one into the other onto the board itself.
And you want the right angle one. So really we need to release both of those. I think we posted the data sheets, but people want dip trace files for the boards we've made, right? So I could do the easiest thing to do right away would be to get the dip trace file for the P2 Edge Mini and the JonnyMac, and then we can work towards getting the right angle version.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
That would get us all
noted.
the footprints of like the P2 chip itself and everything else if those two, and the P2 Edge card, right?
Yeah, and the P2, there's no reason we can't put all that out there for sure. They would just be posted free for taking.
The cheapest thing will be that breakout board with a flip adapter.
Yep.
Then we have a P1. I mean, that thing can't cost much. And you have to just run, I mean, even as kit, you don't need to run it to the solder machine. It's just a socket.
But yeah, the having a P1 able to plug in to the mini and the breadboard P2 boards and use all the P2 accessories, including the clicks, is a really attractive thing for me, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree too. We can make that. Let's plan on that. I know there will be some decisions to be made about power and everything that might be different that might pose compatibility issues, but you guys will help sort that out.
Yeah. Zoom P2 open forum meeting turns into product development R&D. And once all this COVID pandemic stuff is done, we need to have a really big expo for P2.
Right.
Be sort of a celebration party, and everyone from all over can travel to Parallax and see each other in person again after so many years.
Yeah. Ken, I forget. Did you go to CES? Did you used to go to CES?
Oh yeah, we used to go there and sell basic stamp kits by hundreds. Like 500.
Yeah, they're virtual this year, so none of the vendors are getting to really sell anything.
And these virtual shows have become really worthless. I had to participate in one on Sunday, and it was a real waste of my time.
There's no customers. Yeah, I understand.
Ken, while you're talking about that R&D, could I show you something here? Share my screen.
Yeah.
Why was the mini board limited to the I/O and not something like that?
Oh, I see. Just because it's mini and not medium.
All right. I was just wondering why it didn't bring it all out.
Also, you had one too many of the 2x8 connectors, because there's actually 5 on the mini, and so you can only get 3 more, and you'll use all the IOs because the upper 8 pins are on that little connector that's by itself rotated on the side.
Right. That was just a concept art there. I just wanted to.
Sure. Yeah, the mini could, if you extended it half of what Brian's picture showed, and you could put the 2 connectors on the end and then one more rotated to pair up with the other one. But yeah, it's not mini, it's medium, right? You'd have to have a third product that's the P2 medium.
You know, Roy, now that we're in this virtual world for a while, we could bring back the telepresence robots.
Yeah, Remo TV is still up and running.
Yeah, I can run I'll do an article on them. As soon as I finish my COVID-19 article.
You know, Roy, you probably have enough photos of the inside of Parallax that you could put that into Unreal Engine and make us feel like we're there.
I'm not a very good artist. I would have to commission one of our artists to do that. So Ken could also run around with one of those 3D mapping cameras inside the office and have it do 3D mapping of the office and then send me that data and I could import it into Unreal.
Yeah, too bad we didn't know it before Halloween. You could have done the Halloween thing all over again. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that Halloween thing you guys did with the parallaxy robots and that room with all the decorations and everything, that was really neat. That Stephanie,
That was fun.
Was it Stephanie that did all that? Yeah.
You mean when we had Jill and we let people drive around to Scribbler 3 and make it shoot fire?
No, the more recent one with the parallaxy robot that had the arm on it that could swing down and pop balloons.
Oh, yeah.
It had a bunch of balloons around the room. And then they also had like a maze and there was like little hidden things that you had to search for by driving the robot around to find like the number 1 thing and the number 2 thing and around the room. It was all
the only
very
thing
cool.
I had trouble with is sometimes teenagers would get a hold of my telepresence robot and they do stuff like they start banging on the door because they wanted to go into the other rooms.
Yeah, so Jill added on Remo TV, you can have your robot up and be private, and then you can just give out the link to the people that you want to come visit it.
Yeah.
So you can control that a lot better.
And Remo is working still, Roy?
Yeah, it's up and running. Jill's been on a bit of a hiatus because of medical issues. She had some surgery and downtime and whatnot. But it's still up and running, and they've updated all the, the Python code that runs on the robot in the Raspberry Pi. And there's, the parallaxy stuff is all still works with it, and all the other robots still work with it. So it's a little bit nicer platform than the Let's robot was.
I would love to see that adapted to outdoor security possibilities too.
Yeah, there's a few people that have run their robots outside with Remo, and it works fine. What they do is they use their phone as a hotspot, and so they have to walk around with the robot or be at least nearby it. There was one guy that let his robot stray a little farther away from him than he had hoped, and somebody grabbed it and threw it in the trash can. And then when he went to go get it and confront the guy, like the police showed up and they were asking him like, "What's this robot you have?" And like people were talking with the robot, and he had to like turn it off so that he could talk to the police. It all got worked out fine, but it was just a really funny outdoor experience.
You get that with drones now. The police will come and talk to you if you're flying your drone, and even in your own yard, especially one as big as the Elevate.
Diver Bob, did you thought about that part? If you let that big boy running off your truck?
There was an event at Parallax in 2012, and I'm sure some of you were there, when we had Nick and Kevin, and this was when drones were just starting to become popular and the rules were not all clear, and they were flying gyroscope and accelerometer only. No, just gyroscope-based flight control systems from our Suite 200 with a giant screen up. With the remote control inside the building, and the drone was circling outside around the office park like quarter mile in the sky, and everyone was cheering on the inside of the building. And then we heard this thing buzzing towards the building at high speed, and there was a huge line outside of people that were touring the manufacturing, and the drone hit the side of the building and blew up in a million pieces. And everybody cheered.
Yeah, you're not supposed to fly that high either without.
There were a lot of no-nos.
The rules, I think it's like a 400-foot ceiling.
This is before all that.
And every drone, even little ones now, have to be registered.
That's right. Hey, something important. We have a new friendly Canadian here today, Cosimo Bruzesi from Ontario. So he's new with Parallax stuff, and he's into robotics. So welcome, Cosimo.
Hi there. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just listening in. Thank you for having me on here. I appreciate it.
What part of Canada are you from?
Toronto, Ontario.
Okay, I have my youngest son lives in Alberta in a little town called Airdrie.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've been to Alberta many times.
So is it Cosimo or Cosimo?
Cosmo.
Okay, Cosimo.
Cosimo.
I want to make sure I get it right.
Last name Bruzesi? Bruzesi?
Bruzes.